Good morning, everybody. I can see that more people are coming in. I hope this will work technically with a lot of participants in this Zoom meeting. I'm Christine Nellemann. I'm director of the National Food Institute here in Denmark, and I have been looking forward to this webinar for a long time. So pleased to see you all. When we were contacted as the National Food Institute to make a side event for the World Food Summit, which is an international event held by the Danish Ministry of Food, Fisheries and Agriculture, I immediately thought about this area, the healthy and sustainable diets. And that's because we often hear of it, both as consumers, how can we shift our dietary habits, but also as when we look into the science part at the National Food Institute, but also many other institutes around Europe and the world, we are looking into how to actually make the science behind a shift in dietary patterns, so into a more healthy and sustainable diet. So I immediately thought about this area because we have been working on this. We made this scientific background for the dietary guidelines back in 2005, 2013, but it's the first time that we actually included sustainability into the scientific background for the authorities here in Denmark to come up with guidelines for a sustainable and healthy diet. So today, I would like to welcome you to this webinar, where we are going to look into how researchers, consumers, authorities, but also companies can work and contribute into obtaining the UN goals on a healthy and more climate-friendly diet. So when we look into this, we actually both need data, we need consensus on what methods to use, but this should not stop us, right? So we are going to look into that today. We are going to hear about experiences in implementing new national dietary guidelines. We're going to look into how to put this into the public food area. And we're going to look into tools to motivate consumers and producers into this dietary shift into sustainable food. And then we're going to have an overview of sustainable and climate-friendly dietary advice in different countries. So I'm looking very much forward to listening to the discussions today. So I'll try to just go on. I think I can see that our first speaker is here. It's Peter Fantke. He is a professor at DTU, the technical university here in Denmark. And Peter, you would like to give the first talk today about moving beyond climate change. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Christine, and thanks for inviting me here. I'm very excited because food is a huge thing that becomes more and more relevant with all the disturbances and things that we see in the world going on in relation to agricultural systems, in relation to climate change, in relation to biodiversity, but also health and disruption and resilience. So I'm really happy to be the first speaker to kick it off here today after your introduction. And I want to look really, how can we move beyond climate change? Is there something more to look at? How can we assess it? And is it actually enough? So these are the three things that I would really like to shed some light on here today. I'm professor here at the Technical University of Denmark in the Environmental and Resource Engineering Department. That is a newly created department as from 1st of March. And the whole section around me, I'm head of section here, is really focusing on quantifying environmental sustainability impacts. And that includes, but is not only related to climate. So with that, I kick it off. For me, when we relate food to sustainability in an overarching systems perspective, I see three questions that mainly trigger us. Is sustainability really more than just climate change? And of course, when we look at the planetary boundaries, which I come back to later a little bit, you see a figure here on the top that is a little bit different than what you might have been used to from the Rockström paper in Nature and Science. And we see the novel entities, for example, making a big space, covering a big space here already. So we see climate change here, but we see also biosphere integrity, and we see, of course, the biogeochemical cycles and flows worldwide that are disrupted. These are the main.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you have a presentation or is this just introduction? because people are writing in the chat that they cannot see the presentation.
I think it's much easier if I share my screen, because I was seeing all that, of course, on my side,
Yeah.
but you didn't see it. Thanks for reminding me, Christine, and sorry for the hiccup.
No, it's fine.
I hope you can see it now. Perfect. Okay. I was in my first slide anyway here, so I was going back to the 3 overarching questions when we relate food to sustainability. The first is there something beyond climate change? And of course, the planetary boundaries figure that I have just tried to outline without showing my screen, so calling on your imagination, you see it now here, the red zones for novel entities, that is chemicals and plastics, the red zones for biosphere integrity, and the red zones for the biogeochemical cycles are things that we have to take care of beyond climate change, as simple as that. And I come back to that in more detail. The second question is, okay, if there are issues related to sustainability beyond climate change, how can we assess all that? And what's most important for that is the second figure here in the middle, is we have to take a life cycle perspective. If we talk about food products, food systems, agri-food systems, it's all about not just the food item itself, how we are consuming it, are there health effects for us, are there climate change effects from any production step. We have to really look into the whole life cycle to understand trade-offs, to understand pattern, to understand burden shifting from one location to another, from one stage to another. When we, for example, replace fossil-based chemicals for bioplastic production for food contact materials to bio feedstocks to use that. So we might reduce oil refinery related greenhouse gas and air pollution emissions, but we might replace it by new land use areas covered if we produce biofeedstocks, for example, for maize and starch and whatever. We use pesticides, we use fertilizers, all that are important trade-offs to take on. The third important question is what is sustainable is one thing, but if it's sustainable enough, that is important to understand. How much should we look into each of the different pillars to understand, are the impacts to be reduced further or only to a certain extent until we have achieved really what's absolutely sustainable. Now I dig into the first pillar, what else should we care about beyond climate change? And here we see on the left side various impact categories that we actually have included in several assessment schemes worldwide. And global warming, as you see, is called here. Sometimes it's called climate change, sometimes it's called global warming. It's just one of the few that feeds into different pathways for humans or ecosystems or resources. These are the 3 main areas that we really look into to protect the world from, to also sustain our societies, how we live today, and hopefully also in the future. One is human health, of course, very important. One is ecosystem, and one is natural resource availability. And we see particulate matter formation, we see ozone formation, ionizing radiation, many things, human toxicity, ecotoxicity, water use, we see acidification, we see land use change, fossil and other resources use. All that can be relevant depending on what diet, where we look into, what food products compose a diet, how are things actually produced in the agricultural systems, and so on. How are they manufactured? What packaging is used? Where is it coming from? How much is it transported? All these questions feed into, well, there is something we really need to go beyond climate change. Last slide on that part is, when we consider all impact categories, we really avoid burden shifting, but also the impact profiles are highly different and variable across food products. We see here one example, a weighted impact distribution per 1 serving of a strawberry yogurt, and we see climate change on impacts on human health is one of the dominating impacts. And that can be very different for other food products, right? We see as a second important one is actually a fine particulate matter, air pollution, that often can be co-reduced together with greenhouse gas emissions in the respective industrial facilities, for example. Mostly of that comes with the industrial production, but actually also from the agricultural production, machinery on the fields, and so on and so on. We see also here green, that is the land use, that is really important, and we have some toxicity. So the darker blue here is really related to toxicity. And there can be different things. What was that?
Please unmute. It was just somebody who
okay, it wasn't me. Okay, good.
Sorry.
I just move on, no problem. So that is the first thing, we need to look beyond climate change. Of course, we have important focus areas beyond climate change. One is the chemicals inside the food or inside the food contact materials that can actually migrate into the food, for example. You know all about the important currently ongoing debate on the PFAS chemicals, which are really multi-performance chemicals, so they really have very much desirable functions. On the other hand, they're called the forever chemicals because they're super persistent for organics, they're accumulating, they're very mobile, and they're also toxic. So for human toxicity, actually, consumer exposure often dominates overall health impacts for the toxicity part. So here also we see, we need to look into different population groups and pathways to understand better what we should really assess. Now, how can we really assess the entirety of sustainability impacts beyond or including actually climate change impacts of products and food systems? Here, life cycles matter. So we need to take a full life cycle perspective. We can take the life cycle of one product system. We can compare it against the life cycle of another product system. One product might be dominating, have global warming impacts. The other one might have more nutrition related or land use and pesticide related impacts. So there are trade-offs we can evaluate if we bring them together in the right way. And we can in the end understand one of the two systems is more sustainable than the other. That is in the end what we can understand, and we can see which of the impacts drive each of the systems, which of the life cycle stages of each of the systems drive its own profile, where do we have hotspots, where do we have trade-offs. All that can be really assessed if we take the whole life cycle into consideration. Now, very briefly, what are the main phases of a proper life cycle assessment? There is one goal and scope definition where we define the question, where we define the whole system, understand where are the boundaries of the system, what should be included, what should be excluded, what is the function upon which we actually compare two systems, which is with respect to foods and diets, not always easy. We should perhaps often not do it based on a kilogram harvested, for example, because nutritional amounts are relevant. It can be per hectare and yield, and many things can be used here as function to compare entire systems from a single food to a whole diet. Thank you so much. Thank you. Then the second step is we have the whole system, and we need to understand what are the emission outflows from the whole system towards the environment, and what are the natural resources used for the whole system. And once we have that, we get a full overview of emissions from the whole systems, and we have a whole overview of what are the resources consumed by that system. That can be going back to the yogurt if we produce it from different types of milk, for example, and using different types of packagings here. Then all these flows like emissions to the environment, greenhouse gases, toxic chemicals, acidifying chemicals, ozone depleting substances, and so on, and resources used, land, water, minerals, and so on. We combine that with impact assessment methods. Here in our group, we strongly actually develop methods since decades for assessing human toxicity, for assessing ecotoxicity, for assessing land use, and so on. How to translate the outflows and inflows into and from the technological food system into impacts on the different environmental pillars. And finally, of course, we need to interpret all that consistently, bring these things together to understand, can they be combined? Yes, no, what are the trade-offs, and so on and so on. One small example here, we see just for climate change, because it is one of the focus areas here, we can see that is different foods items, foodstuffs, and their contribution of the life cycle stages to climate change impacts from 0 to 100%. And we see that varies widely. So the brownish is the land use change in the beginning of the agricultural production. The yellow is the livestock production, for example, if you have burgers, of course, and beef and so on. And the gray here is the losses into the environment. We have packaging, the dark green here. We have the light green, the crop production for food crops, for example, like peas here. And we see we have a wide variability across the different food items in terms of their contribution to climate change. And such a profile figure is available also for land use, for water use impacts, for human toxicity, for fine particulate matter, and so on. So for each impact category, we can actually start to compare entire diets by composing them of different food items this way. And then keeping it at the same time transparent, focusing on hotspots. Here we would need to see if we want to really reduce climate change impacts from pea production, we need to focus on the crop production system and not on the packaging, for example. These are results we can already derive from examples like that. But if we know something is more or less than sustainable as compared to each other, we still do not know whether that is actually enough. To understand that, we need to put an absolute perspective as a third part of my points here today on the whole system. Even if one system is more or less sustainable than the other, they might still both be unsustainable overall. So the question is, how do we really move a system towards being actually sustainable in absolute terms? Of course, what we need to avoid is like greenwashing things, you know. This big Hummer car from Arnold Schwarzenegger runs with vegetable oil, but it takes 40 liters of 100 kilometers. I mean, that's just amazing. It's just really greenwashing. So we need to really benchmark that against targets that are biophysical based and are really anchored in the real environment and not just relative to each other. How do we do that? That's easy said than done. We combine or we relate the different impact categories that you have seen before, from climate change and ozone depletion to finally the different resources impacts we have down here. We relate them to actual biophysical boundaries. And planetary boundaries is one, not the only one. It's one concept that actually tries to define biophysical targets for different entities. However, these impact categories cannot easily be linked, of course, to these. For example, when we see human toxicity, where would that go? It might go to the novel entities. And then the question is, where might ecotoxicity go? It might also go here to chemicals and plastics, but then we have biosphere integrity, and of course, ecosystem toxicity relates strongly to biosphere integrity if we link it to the biosystem function. So we don't know really, there are several things we need to do here, but target setting is certainly the first step to link sustainability to the absolute targets that are anchored in the natural environment. Here is a small example of how we can do that. So we pick up the different impact categories you have seen before that is actually also used in life cycle assessment. And then we look here at the fraction of the safe operating space. And the safe operating space is what you saw here in the planetary boundaries concept. You see here a boundary within which impacts do not alter ecosystems or the biosphere flows and systems in a way that would be irreversible or damaged to an extent that cannot be really undone. So that is all within the safe space where the biosphere can really operate normally, we can say. And that is what we call safe operating space. And here's an example for the Danish consumption of potatoes annually. And when we see here the red zone, the red bar is what is really the safe operating space. If we would be all within the green areas of the planetary boundaries for the Danish potato production and consumption. And we will see for stratospheric ozone depletion is the only one where we are actually absolutely sustainable. And all the others exceed with the current systems how we produce and consume potatoes in Denmark. I think that is the eye-opener for us to see what is really needs to be changed, but also how much needs to be changed. The important difficulty here is, of course, beyond target setting, how do we entitle each consumer contribution to the overall pressure on the boundaries that we defined here, right? Potato production is only one of the pressures that contributes to climate change. There are many other industries, other food products that also contribute. So how do we disentangle that and apportion that to the different contributors? That is one of the three main aspects in the absolute sustainability assessment. But with that, I think we have seen that what is important, that's my last slide already here, we need to consider all impacts. Often climate change is a driver, but often it's not. So we have the really important aspects like chemical pollution, plastic pollution, land use, fertilizer use that is driving often food systems. We have to include entire life cycle because it's not only the use, it's not only the crop production that matters. In some cases, it's much more other things. And it matters what we do at the end of life, of course. We have to compare impacts against biophysical targets to achieve absolute environmental sustainability. And to bring three small solution levers on the game here, we have an increased resilience of the food system through crop diversification. It's really important because it could reduce the needs for pest control if we have more diverse crops and not just the huge monocultures that we often see. The second one is we need to better adapt to local crop production conditions to reduce resources. I have seen, for example, banana plantations in Central America. It's really not sweetened. It's full of fungus because it's hot, it's humid. So it's natural that all the fungus goes there. They need fungicides. So if they would go to more optimized areas where it would be more natural, where they could actually grow organic bananas, that is more suitable. And finally, we need to, of course, reduce packaging as an example, but we need to reduce overall many things in our lives and increase recycling rates to reduce also waste and unsustainable chemical and plastic flows in the environment. And with that, I think I hope I could give a bit of scope of what else is out there beyond climate, that life cycles matter, and that we need to actually push our systems towards an absolute sustainability scale. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. So please now, thank you to you, and stop sharing your slides, and then I'll ask our next speaker to take the floor. So our next speaker is Corné van Dooren, and you're a senior advisor for sustainable diets in World Wildlife Foundation. And Corné, are you here?
Yes, hello.
Oh, good. That's good to see you. And please, if you have a presentation, please share it. And we are looking very much forward to your presentation today.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you for inviting me. Good morning, everybody. Yes, my talk is about food-based dietary guidelines in different countries. For your information, for a year I worked at the National Nutrition Center in the Netherlands, and I did my PhD on this item. So I will share you some thoughts about the climate-friendly food-based dietary guidelines for now and in the future in different countries. For WWF, we want to develop a sustainable and healthy food system that is in harmony with nature and provides enough and nutritious food for now and the future generations. And this is in line with the sustainable diets definition of the World Health Organization and the FAO. They call it sustainable healthy diets when it has a low environmental impact as measured by a method displayed that are culturally acceptable, that support biodiversity and planetary health. And then you come to the planetary boundaries, of course. The Federation of European Nutrition Societies declared that all food-based dietary guidelines should include some aspects of sustainability and environmental impact of our diets. The Joint Research Center of the European Commission has a big database with all different types of food-based dietary guidelines, and you can find there more details of the guidelines of every country. And in the title of this session, we talk about climate-friendly diets, but it's of course more impacts on sustainability. And if you look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, there are several goals that are related to our nutrition and to the way we consume. And one of the focus points for the guidelines in the past was public health, no hunger, good health and well-being, good education. But of course, we will also look at more environmental sustainability goals, clean water, energy, climate action, life below water and life on land. But they are not totally integrated. So healthy diets are not always sustainable diets and the other way around. So there are different methods if you look at the existing sustainable food-based dietary guidelines that are used, and one of them is introduce additional guidelines, additional rules about quantities of products, about choice editing or specifications. And one of the first examples is the guidelines from the Nordic countries, the report from 2012, introducing 5 guidelines related to more plant-based and less animal-based foods. Also giving some guidelines for minimizing food waste, and eating products from the season. it was also introduced in Finland in 2014, pointing at eating more plant-based and less red meat, pointing also at reducing food waste and weight control related to higher energy needs. And a year later, also Sweden introduced a new guidelines. Find your way to eat greener, not too much, and to be active. Some very easy to understandable guidelines to eat more from this and less from that, and also some extra additional rules for consumers. And the Nutritional Society was a bit surprised by the guidelines from Brazil in 2014. They introduced the golden rule as a type of additional guideline. Always prefer natural and minimal processed foods and freshly made dishes and meals. And there are other examples. The US tried to do this in 2015, but it was rejected by the Congress. The UK introduced sustainability in the guidelines in 2016 and Canada in 2019. And if you look at the example from the UK, it was calculated that these guidelines would help to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions with 32%. So I made an overview of different countries in Europe and some outside Europe, Brazil and Canada. And if you look at the additional rules they introduced, there are rules about less animal, more plant-based diets, about certified fish, about eating more pulses, drinking tap water. Some introduce less ultra-processed foods. Most of them more vegetables or more seasonal vegetables, more local products. Some talked about certified and organic foods, and some about less food waste. But there were also other approaches. Second one is to demonstrate synergies between environmental sustainability and public health. And one of the first examples was this study from the Veritas Foundation about the double pyramid in 2010. And they stated that the lower the footprint of a product, the more preferred it is in that double pyramid. And it was an inspiration for the guidelines in Belgium. You see here the Belgium guidelines from 2017, the triangle, and it was partly based on the double pyramid, but also based on one of my studies about an index for sustainability with products with a high impact on the climate that are very low in nutritious value, and the other way around, products that are very low in environmental footprint that has a lot of high nutrient density. A third approach is optimization modeling. That's a mathematical method to find optimal solutions that are both healthy and sustainable. And one of the first examples was done by WWF UK called the Live Well Plate. They set a target for 25% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions for the guidelines, and they came up with this type of Live Well Plate as an alternative for the official guidelines, showing that you can reduce your impact on the climate with a different diet, with some other sources of protein, more vegetables and more carbohydrate-rich products. And we've done the same for the Dutch guidelines. In 2015, 2016, I was part of the development of the guidelines, and we introduced also a kind of modeling with limits to quantities of meats and fish and other animal-based products, and calculating a kind of optimal diet for the Dutch consumer. This resulted in what we call the Wheel of Five in 2016, with limitation to the meat consumption to 500 grams a week, and fish we reduced from 2 times to 1 times a week, and also the dairy recommendations were somewhat lower than in the past. But then we calculated the effect on greenhouse gas emission, and it showed that most of the diets were lower in impact, but it's only 12, 13, 14%, and so the impact was small. The French did another approach. They in 2016 they didn't look at greenhouse gas emissions, but they looked at contaminations levels of food, so at more toxicological impacts of our diets, and they optimized on the to get the contaminations as low as possible. And if you look at other studies about optimization, you see that they also introduce other sustainable development goals for affordability, so and for acceptability of diets. And I did a kind of review study. I found more than 50 studies looking at optimization of diets and what kind of constraints they use. Most of the time in the past they used affordability constraints. That's the orange bars, the studies, and later on they also introduced acceptability as an issue and environmental constraints. And more in the last years you see more studies on diets looking at environmental impact, but most of the time they look at greenhouse gas emissions and land use, and not to the other planetary boundaries. Also, the Germans are working on new guidelines. They also look at optimization modeling together with the French Institute. And then we come to the new guidelines in Denmark. There was also kind of modeling to get them in line with the Eat-Lancet diets, including additional rules. Maybe also looking at climate impact, but I can't do it into detail because I think the next speaker will look at this more in detail. What we see that there are some ways to look at more sustainability in the food-based dietary guidelines, looking at different sustainable development goals. Some more on the health side, some more on the biosphere, on the environmental impact, and some more also on affordability and acceptability. And I think in the future we want to look at a more integrated model. This is the example from the donut model, that you have a type of health foundation, some basics for your health, and an ecological ceiling, and this ecological ceiling is related to the planetary boundaries, as also Frank introduced in his speech, so that you look not only at greenhouse gas emission, but at total all kinds of impacts on the planet. So, summarized, in the future, we will look at more constraints, the planetary boundaries, the ecological ceilings of the system, and at the nutritional needs, the social foundation, energy, water, food, health, also related to other sustainable development goals. And but I think it's harder and harder to get there, because there are the more constraints you put in, the less solutions you will have in the future. The Eat-Lancet diet is an example, but a solution for 2050. But it's harder to get there, and you get more constraints and more rules for consumers if they want ultimately a sustainable diet. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. This was a very nice overview, also what's been going on, and to give us an insight into the different countries. So I'll go to the next speaker. It's Pøhl Enevoldsen from our Danish authorities. So it's the office manager of the Danish Veterinary and Food Administration. And Anne, you're going to tell us about the Danish official dietary guidelines that was just mentioned here before. So welcome.
You can both hear me and see me, and hopefully you can also see my slides. I'll just put them in presentation mode. I hope it's working now. Well, thank you for the invitation, Christine. And for the next 15 minutes, I will share some of our work with developing these new food-based dietary guidelines in Denmark. We launched them in 2021, so we have a bit of experience in it, but there's also a lot of things that are still new to us when working with this whole new area. But for the next 15 minutes, I'll try to give you a brief view in how we develop these food-based dietary guidelines, how we included stakeholders, and last but not least, how we at the moment support the implementation and how we will look upon that big task. Here you see the official guidelines, and underneath these 7 guidelines, we of course have further details. I'd be happy to send them to you afterwards. But just to show you an example, we guide the consumers to eat, for example, 350 grams of meat in total per week, and on the other hand, to increase their intake of legumes significantly, and hopefully over time they will reach the goal for 100 grams of prepared legumes a day. The National Food Institute has calculated what we will save in greenhouse gas emissions by following these guidelines, and they calculated 31 to 45% of reduced greenhouse gases if all would follow these guidelines. Here you see the evidence behind our official dietary guidelines, and it is based on 3 important publications. We have the Nordic nutrition recommendations from 2012. We have the evidence for our earlier guidelines from 2013. And last but not least, we have the scientific background from 2020, where the Danish National Food Institute integrated both health and climate in their publication. And that is the evidence behind these official dietary guidelines. Here you see a brief view over the process, and it might look rather simple. I can tell you it was not. It felt like 2 steps ahead and 1 back all along this process. From the very beginning, it was crucial for us to involve a broad range of stakeholders in the process. For example, we invited the Danish health authorities, we invited the Danish Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities. We talked with NGOs, food industry, retailers, and as part of our, so to speak, new friends, we also invited organizations working with sustainability and climate. And especially the last part was rather new to us, but also very valuable in this process. As you can see, we arranged 2 workshops for our stakeholders where we presented our drafts for the guidelines. We also did a consumer survey to see if the consumers understood what we were trying to communicate. And I can tell you that after showing our first draft, both our stakeholders and consumers said that this is not working, you have to do another draft. And of course, so we did. Alongside this simple process, we had, of course, tons of internal discussions and a lot of drafts. And we also had an ongoing dialogue with researchers from the Danish National Food Institute. And we could not have done this work without them, I have to say. We have often been asked if we were afraid to be accused of being in the pocket of the industry when we chose to involve them. And I must say that the clear answer is no. First of all, it is our experience during this work that our stakeholders are well aware of the complexity of the work. And when you involve stakeholders in open workshops, it's also evident for all that different stakeholders have different views upon the draft that you present. And it gives an understanding that working out or developing new food-based dietary guidelines is not a work where you are obliged to please all. It's a work where you have to stick to the evidence and you have to find the best solution in order to develop guidelines that are understandable to the consumers and all of those who are going to work with them afterwards. So I think that's important to mention. Secondly, it's important to mention that we did not discuss the evidence behind the guidelines. We discussed how we could communicate the guidelines, what the tone should be like, what was understandable, how we could easily come out with the guidelines, and so on. And that's why I think it's doable and it's important to involve these stakeholders. It's also our belief and experience that by involving our stakeholders, we both get a more qualified product, but we also ensures ownership and motivation for the important work with the implementation afterwards. As I said, this has not at all been easy, neither the process nor the challenges that we faced along the road. One of the main challenges has, of course, been to integrate a focus on climate without compromising the health aspects. And I'm sure that all of you can relate to this, and especially if you combine it with the task where you have to tackle the gap between the existing food culture and the climate-friendly and healthy diet that you want to expose afterwards. If I should give you a brief example, of course, in Denmark, we have a high intake of meat, and we have to lower this significantly. And on the other hand, we have to introduce legumes, pulses to consumers because at the moment, the intake of legumes is almost non-existing. So that's a huge gap that we have to tackle. But on the other hand, we have to get started because otherwise we won't be able to really succeed in having a more climate-friendly diet. And thirdly, we have also experienced that though we have integrated a lot of stakeholders who has been really motivated in the work, we have also been facing a challenge on our way in communicating and implementing these guidelines, since some health professionals are really not motivated by the climate change. So their interest and motivation for using guidelines that both deals with health and climate can be reduced and can be a problem when you want them to work with it. We have had several questions from health professionals asking, what do I do if my client is not interested in climate? And what do I do if I myself are only motivated by the health aspects? And that's, of course, a challenge you have to meet. We had discussions very early in the work whether we should have, stick to our earlier guidelines concerning health and then add on some guidelines regarding the climate. We also had a discussion whether we should have two sets of guidelines, but we rejected that from the very beginning because we think that would be even more confusing to consumers and other partners working with these guidelines. So I can only recommend to combine them, but also be aware that you might face some new challenges regarding some of your stakeholders. And now I'll move on to the work that is probably even more important than developing the guidelines. It's the implementation of the guidelines. As an authority, it is indisputable that we cannot succeed on our own. We need the whole food system to work on this all the way from farmers to consumers. And in that perspective, we see the food-based dietary guidelines as a very strategic tool, not only a communication tool for consumers, but as a strategic tool for the direction of the development of a whole food system. In our small division, we work with the guidelines based on these three strategic paths that you can see here. We work with consumer communication in order to build knowledge, awareness, and interest. Hopefully, we can change their habits, but we know that we also need stronger tools to really succeed in changing the eating habits. We work with, of course, structural changes. It's evident as an authority, we have to also be concerned when it comes to fight inequality in health, and that's why structural changes are so important when you work with implementing the food-based dietary guidelines. And then we work with partnerships because we have found that partnerships are one of the most effective tools when we want to integrate or succeed with a goal that are focusing on several parts of the food system. And we all have to admit that's relevant when it comes to changing eating habits. On the following slides, I'll give you some examples of our initiatives in these three paths. So stick with me. We have developed, as a part of our communication and initiatives, we have developed special guidelines for special target groups. Here you see vegetarians, pregnant and breastfeeding, and plus 65. We have worked together with a Danish science museum called the Experimentarium. They did a huge exhibition, or it's actually there at the moment, I think. They are having an exhibition regarding climate-friendly consumer habits, and of course diets and eating habits is part of that. So that was rather new to us to communicate our guidelines at a museum, but we find it very exciting, and hopefully we will be able to work even more in directions like that. We have also revised a lot of our existing folders. One example is our lunchbox hand, which you see in the right corner. It has five fingers telling you what to remember in your lunchbox. And here, of course, we have also changed a lot. We have a new diet circle coming up, and we're also working on a new guideline label that's concerning the health perspective. You see an example here on your left side. It says guideline, and then eat more vegetables. And it's the thought that you could put it on a foods in the stores. Here you see one of our latest examples. It's a song. It's not a song that we have written, but we were so lucky that 4 communication students had to write an essay about how to communicate the new guidelines, and they chose to write a song. They sent it to us, and we thought it was so good that we had to produce it and communicate it out in the wide world. And I'll just give you a short brief. I won't make you listen to all of it. But the main question in the song is that they walk through all the guidelines, and when they reach the point of the guidelines concerning legumes, they say, excuse me for my language, but they say, what the fuck is a legume? And that's really what the song is about, where they try to combine knowledge with humor. So stay tuned. I'll just see if it's work, and you can hear just a little bit of it. So this was just a short snap of the song, but it's a song that has been talked a lot about in Denmark and in Nordic countries as well. So we are very, very happy. You can't expect us to do another song next year, because I think this was just a lucky punch, but it definitely made something good to our guidelines. And another thing about communication is, of course, labeling initiatives. I told you about one earlier, but as you all know, labeling helps consumers choose the right products. It encourages food producers to develop new and better products, and it's motivate retail to promote certain products. And our minister has just launched that he wants to develop a new climate label for food in Denmark, and hopefully we have some part of the frames within this year. And when we reach that point, we will be happy to share with you. And as you can see up in the right corner, you see a lot of names on the screen, and that is stakeholders who will be involved in developing this new climate label. As I said, we also work with structural initiatives. Lately, here in January, we launched new dietary guidelines for meals in kindergarten, schools, and workplaces. We're working on an educational material, and we have also been working a lot with some minimum criteria for green public procurement. I won't say a lot about the last one, because my colleague Simon will present that earlier in this session, but stay tuned for that one. I think it's a very interesting way to work with implementing food-based dietary guidelines, or a part of the guidelines, because as you can see, it's just minimum. But Simon will go into more details later on. And last but not least, we work with partnerships. We have not at the moment set sail for new partnerships, but we work with existing partnerships in order to implement these guidelines. We have our Danish whole grain partnership, where we focus on increasing the intake of whole grain, and we find that very climate friendly. So of course we will keep on working on that. We have our food partnership for health and climate, and in this partnership, we have more than 140 partners within food producers, retailers, and NGOs. And we have divided the partners in different categories. And for example, we have a category for fruit and for increasing fruit and vegetable sales and intake. And here we have a project together where we test different tools for notching and increased sale of fruits and vegetables in the store. Other groups have goals focusing on increasing the number of key hallmark products and so on. So it's a very efficient way to work with implementing these guidelines. And our third partnership is the Danish Healthy Food Council. Here we settle for projects together. We have together worked with the World Pulses Day in February. As I said earlier, we have launched new guidelines for kindergarten, schools, and workplaces. And our next step is to develop tools for professional kitchens who want to implement these guidelines. What do they need when they have to change the food they serve? What do they need themselves? What do they need for the customers, and so on? And also we have a project called Yes Please a Little Less, focusing on reducing sizes, and that is of course also relevant when it comes to talking about a climate-friendly diet, that you eat not more than needed. And a fourth example is a guidance for climate claims that we have developed together in this project. So that was just a little bit about how we work with implementing the food-based dietary guidelines in our three strategic paths: communication, structural changes, and partnership. And it might seem that we're all done. I don't think we are. We just started. We need to put a lot of effort if we want to succeed, if we really want to change the Danish eating habits, since we have a lot of work to do. And that needs persistency. We need to be curious to find new ways in order to work with changing the eating habits. We need to further collaborate. Of course, we need a lot of new research, since this area, the sustainability and the climate area, is just keep expanding, and new questions keep coming. We need to keep on working to understand the consumers and a lot of other things. So I hope that you, with this short presentation, have had an answer to the 3 questions. How did we design the process? How did we involve stakeholders? And how are we at the moment working with the implementation? So for now, I'll just say thank you for your attention. And if you want to know more, I'll just advertise a little bit for the World Food Summit later this week. On Friday, there is a very interesting session about sustainable diets. So use the link here to submit yourself. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and a very nice talk and very interesting. We'll take a short break now. So we'll take a pause until 10:25, and then we'll come back again. So hope to see you there and looking forward. So a short break now. Okay, I hope you're all back now from the break. Maybe had a new cup of coffee, a healthy and sustainable snack. And now we'll continue with the program for this webinar on healthy and climate-friendly diets. And I have been learning a lot this morning, and I'm looking forward to learn even more now. So I will give the floor to the next speaker, who is Senior Advisor Trolle, who is working at the National Food Institute here at DTU. And I'm looking very much forward, Ellen, so please take the floor.
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to present. Yes, as you know, I'm part of the team at the National Food Institute that has provided advice on the food to the Food Administration regarding the food-based dietary guidelines. So I will try to share my presentation. So I will present results from a new study we have done, where we have been looking at the climate impact of the transition to a Danish plant-rich diet. We have published this. I've published this together with colleagues at DTU and at Aarhus University. And the primary aim of the study was to estimate the carbon food reduction of a transition from the current Danish diet to a plant-rich diet, as recommended by the official food-based dietary guidelines. But also to estimate the contribution of different food groups to the total carbon footprint of the diet and to the transition. And we used 2 data sets on foods on the Danish market, a preliminary updated carbon footprint data based on a traditional attributional LCA bottom-up approach from literature, and we have called it AU DTU data. And the second data set, it was based on consequential LCA, a kind of top-down hybrid approach using input-output data. It is a big climate database launched by the green think tank from Denmark called Consisto. And the study is partly financed by the Ministry of Food and partly by the Danish Council on Climate Change. But first, I will briefly present how we model this Danish adapted plant-rich diet. It was a part of providing the scientific evidence to guidance the revision of the current official Danish food-based dietary guidelines towards a more sustainable diet. And when we were doing that, we develop this nutritional adequate Danish adapted plant-rich diet. So this is more about the evidence behind the food-based dietary guidelines that Anne Pøhl has just been talking about. And first we were looking at the evidence, the health evidence and the sustainability evidence. And it was important for us to build on the evidence behind the former food-based dietary guidelines from 2013 and use the methods from there. So we were looking into the former evidence, and we added some new evidence from the work of the research fund, and also did kind of quality check with newer systematic reviews. And we also look into literature about dietary patterns, and all pointed of a more plant-based diet to have this positive health effect. And also when we were looking at sustainability, the literature about sustainability and diets and foods, it also pointed at this more plant-rich diet. So our method was to use the Eat Lancet reference diet. We did not base our recommendation on the evidence that is provided by the Eat Lancet committee, but we used the diet, the reference diet that they had provided, and we used our Danish food database on nutrients in foods. And we used also food and amount reflected from the Danish food culture, as we know from our national dietary surveys. So, and then we also made this adjustment. So it was in accordance with the health evidence and with the Nordic nutrition recommendation on micronutrients. Yes, so this was our method, and this is the main results, or an overview of the results when we did this. The plant-rich diet did fulfill the nutrient recommendations regarding the macro and micronutrients, except for vitamin D. And we also could point on different vitamins and minerals that need special attention when we are going to recommend a plant-rich diet. But back to this, the bars here, where we try to show what should happen when you go from the red bar. It is a current diet from our national food survey from 11 to 13, and to the green bars, which are the adapted plant-rich diet. And as you can see, red and grain should go up. The potatoes are almost the same. Vegetables should go up. Fruits and berries should go up. And the legumes or pulses should also increase a lot from this very low level at the current diet, as Anne also talked about. Nuts and seeds should go up. Vegetables, oils up. Fish and seafood should also increase. And the meat should be much lower, the total meat, and especially the beef. And milk and dairy should lower at some point, and also cheese. But as you can see, the plant-rich diet actually includes animal foods, but in a lower content. And then when we should estimate the climate impact of this transition, We took part in the diet from the Danish National Dietary Surveys, and we also use this reference diet, as I just mentioned. And then we use data from our preliminary updated data from Aarhus University and DTU, and also the data from Concito, the big climate database. And this is about the data. And it is just to mention that it is two different approaches to gain data, the carbon footprint data, where we, when we updated the data together with Aarhus University, we looked into the literature based on attributional LCA and bottom-up approach, while the data in the big climate database is completely different, and it is there is a nice report at the website where you can look this method up if you want. At the data from Concito, they are both with and without the indirect land use change, which could be a part of the total carbon footprint. And we also made it possible to make the compare with since we aligned data, the functional units, so we were able to compare our calculations. We also made the data so that it could match the intake level, the food intake level, as we got it from our current diet and also from the reference diet, the plant-rich diet. And then we use intakes of the different items, food items, grams per day or grams per 10 megajoule, and multiplied with the carbon footprint of foods with the same type of food, where it's, and when we do this, it is important to bear in mind if we are using figures for raw foods or processed food, prepared food, and so on. So we have to be sure that these data actually match each other. And this is the main result, where you can see that the transition from the current diet to the plant-rich diet will be around 31% if you use the DTU data, or it will be around 43 or 44 or 45% when you're using the big climate database. And there's a little difference, but not that much. If you include, I look indirect land use change, or if you don't. In the DTU data, we do not include ILUC or land use change at all. So as you can see, this was the difference was due to a higher carbon footprint of the current diet when you use the big climate database, and lower carbon footprint when you use when it is a plant-rich diet. So this is the difference came from that. And then a little bit about the contribution from the food groups. As you can see here, this is the relative contributions of food groups. And this is the three bars here is about the current diet, and the three bars here is about the plant-rich diet. And as you can see, the beef, which is the black bars, has a high contribution to the carbon footprint of the current diet, and it differs depending on which type of data you actually use when you calculate. It is much higher when you use a big climate database. But you can also see that other parts of the diet contribute a lot, and the animal food actually contribute with 61% when you use the AUDTU data, and when you use the big climate data, the animal foods contribute with 69%. So the animal foods, of course, important, and that's why it has been lowered when you go to the plant-rich diet. So this is how the contribution looks like when it comes to the plant-rich diet, where the beef has been lowered a lot. The pork still contribute with some extent, and the pork is the green one, and also the poultry, since the poultry was a little higher in the plant-rich diet, so it contributes more, but not as much more when you use the AUDTU data, because of a higher carbon footprint when it comes to these data than when it comes to the big climate database. So it differences between both the amount and the carbon footprint of the individual groups. The other figure is about the change, it's the absolute change. And also here you can see that the beef and lamb is the most important contributor to the change between the current diet and the plant-rich diet. But you can also see that when it comes to the calculation with the AUDTU data, it is almost as important with the reduction in the pork intake, also with the cheese.
And your sound is a little bad, so please speak up. I think your mic might be.
Yeah, sometimes it's a link, but you can also see. I just want also to point out discretionary food, which is, sweet drinks, alcoholic drinks, and candy, and so on, where the contribution to the reduction is almost the same using the two types of data, and it's a lot because the discretionary food has decreased a lot from the current to the plant-rich diet.
You're very difficult to hear, Ellen. So, but yes.
So, but I will
finish now, right? Yeah.
And then maybe it's better. So the conclusion was that the transition from the current Danish diet consistent with the food-based dietary guidelines warrants a substantial reduction in carbon footprint. The choice of carbon footprint data has an impact on the obtained carbon footprint reduction. And since the carbon footprint of different foods differ between data, strategy for achieving this dietary reduction, carbon footprint reduction may be different depending on what data is used. And then we also, in our paper, point of future perspectives, continuously update data needed. And it is also important to include other sustainability topics, land use, water use, acidification, eutrophication, biodiversity, etc.
Thank you very much.
And then thank you for listening. And I want to thank my colleagues, of course, especially Mathilde for helping out with these nice slides, and also all the other colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen, and a very nice presentation. I think we are going to look into giving you a new laptop or an external headset, something like that for the sound.
That would be nice, yeah.
And then I'll introduce our next speaker, who is Charlotte Thy, who I just mentioned, because Charlotte, you would come into some of these issues. And you are from the Nordic Environmental Footprint, and you're going to tell us about this collaboration within the Nordic countries. So please take the floor.
Thank you very much. And I've really been looking forward to this opportunity to share some of the Nordic work with the participants in this workshop, or rather webinar. I can give you some background relating to the method, but also how we are collaborating in the Nordics around environmental footprinting of food. So I have to figure out how to share my screen. My name is Charlotte Thy. I work in Bureau Veritas, where I'm the senior product developer on sustainability in the Nordics. And I have a background where I've been working with environmental footprinting for around 10 years or so. In Bureau Veritas, on the one hand, we are working with both making LCAs for customers. We also verifying LCAs in environmental product declaration, eco-labeling schemes, and so on. But we also run the daily secretariat of the Nordic Environmental Footprint Group under the Nordic Council of Ministers. Do we take the next one? The Nordic Council of Ministers, for the ones who participate in this call who is not from the Nordics, is the official body for Nordic collaboration. So it's covering the 4 large countries, Iceland, but also the autonomous regions. And under the Nordic Council, there are more working groups and other initiatives, which is then working on coordinating policies, creating collaboration between universities and so forth. In 2015, the Nordic Environmental Footprint Group was founded as a measure on the Nordic circular economy activities. And we did this because the European Union, they were speeding up on the integrated product policy. So the PEF initiative had started up at this time, and we thought that on the one hand, we wanted to participate from the Nordic countries, but also as the countries are rather small, to share the burden between us. But we also wanted to, believing that we are a front runner region within sustainability, we also wanted to, you can say, share Nordic solutions with the European Union, with the Commission. And apart from drawing up discussion papers, participating in the development of the footprint methodologies, it has also been important to disseminate knowledge regarding what we call PEF, the Product Environmental Footprint Initiative, to Nordic stakeholders. So if you take the next one. PEF and OEF and PEFCR, there are so many abbreviations in this field. But basically, the European Commission decided, I think back in 2003, that life cycle assessments were the best tool for calculating the environmental impact from products. And a life cycle assessment is, you can say, is assessing the environmental impact in all stages in a product, the production of a product. So if we're talking about food, it will be the farming, but also the fertilizer. If we are in the animal products, it will be application of manure, etc., logistics, transport, the production of the actual food by a producer, then the logistics down to the retailer and so on. And as Ellen, she was just saying, the result of making a life cycle assessment very much depends on the methodology and the data used. So the PEF is the resulting footprint of a product where making a life cycle assessment. If you take the next one. This is the timeline for the development of PEF in the European Union. So it started back in 2003, and then the Commission has been building mandates, analysis, research, methodology, pilot testing, and policy development. And we are in the last part of the policy development, where the PEF methodology was published in December last year, and now we can see that other types of regulation from the Commission is leaning into the published methodology. If you take the next one. Personally, I have been a little surprised that this has been going so much under the radar in many European countries. But you can say the challenges is, if you want to build a single green market, then we need a harmonized approach to assessing the environmental impact of both products, services, and organizations. There are more than 350 eco-labeling schemes out there. And more are coming every day. And this makes it really, really difficult for consumers to participate in the green transition, because what is what? And what can you trust? And what is within the different labeling schemes and what is without? If you take the next one. There was some existing regulation at the point. But the Commission, they came through this analytical phase to the conclusion that the existing standards and regulation couldn't be used for market regulation. I guess everybody knows that the European Union is about creating a harmonized inner market where the you can say the competition is even. So you are not favoring some companies or some countries over others, or making obstacles for getting onto the market. If you take the next one. So what is so special about the PEF approach? We have some generic ISO standards how to calculate life cycle assessments. And I usually say that they are like, if you know you're going to make a bread, they will tell you what ingredients to use. So you need some flour, but how much flour are you needing? You need some water, you need some yeast, you need an oven, but it won't tell you, how much of the ingredients, what temperature, for how long to bake it, or there we have on the other end, on the European PEF CR, because in some categories we have actual category rules, and there it is clearly defined what kind of method you need to use when calculating an environmental footprint for the particular product category. So if we stay in the bread example, it would tell you what kind of flour and how much of it, how much of the other ingredients, for how long it's going to rise, the temperature and the baking time and so on. You kind of get a recipe for doing this. And that also means that all of a sudden it becomes more easy to make a life cycle assessment. It make life cycle assessments more reproducible, they're more consistent, you can start comparing products within a product category, and that also makes that it is less costly making a life cycle assessment than if you have to create everything yourself from scratch. And the Commission, they also issued, that was the JRC, they issued a technical report on how the environmental footprint compliant data sets should be created. So there are some requirements for data using in the PEF initiative. If you have access to large commercial LCA databases, you will find a lot of different entrances in the database. And there's one, for instance, saying EF20 or EF30 compliant data. And that is where you find your data for creating a PEF. There's also many other entrances in the database, but it depends on what you're going to use the data for. But if you don't have access to one of the commercial databases, usually you can say it's only LCA practitioners who have this kind of insight, what is actually in the databases and what are the differences between the data. Can we take the next one? During the time from 2014 to 2018, the Commission were running 2 waves of pilots. So the first wave was on more technical products, and the second wave was on more, I call them organic products. And the ones you can see that's stricken through with red, they didn't make it to the end. For some different reasons, they weren't able to complete a PEF-CR. And now we have the so-called third wave, and now we are out of the pilot phase. So these are not pilots, but they are. I think they all through the first phase of creating a PEF-CR and are entering the testing phase now. And based on the testing phase, the draft PEF-CR will be revised. I spoke to the chairman of the Marine Fish PEF-CR Friday, and he told me that they received around 400 comments during the public consultation phase. And these comments you have to reflect on, and if they are relevant, you have to integrate them in the draft PEF-CR before you do the pilot testing. And if you don't think they're relevant, you have to argue why you don't think so. So you can see it is not so many products which have a category rule. And if you take the next one, we got this Christmas gift from the European Commission in December, and that was the regulation, or you can say the recommendation we have been waiting for a couple of years. And what is really nice here is that the recommendation contains 4 annexes stipulating how to model a PEF if there aren't any category rules. So from the former slide, you can see there was a lot of categories missing. But this gives LCA practitioners a guideline how to model a PEF if you don't have a category rule. And there's also a guideline on how to develop a category rule if anybody should wish to do so. And the 3.0 compliant data sets, they are also now implemented in many commercial databases. There are still missing data, and the Commission is working on this. But this really gives us the opportunity to go ahead without a category rule and model an environmental footprint for a food category which is not in the catalog today. If you take the next one. This is another thing we have been waiting for, the Sustainable Product Initiative. The Commission decided to cut out food food, feed, animals, plants, and medicine. And in the Sustainable Product Initiative and you can say the labeling of food will enter into the farm to fork strategy, and this has you can say a timeline which is a little later than all other products. But I'll just lift the shed on this. I know that people on this call, they are mostly interested in food and diets, but it kind of shows the logic around the PEF initiative. On the existing eco-design directive, there has been some cutoff criteria saying that if you have products which is performing not so well, if they're performing worse than the cutoff criteria, they shouldn't be placed on the European markets. And then on the other hand, you have some products which is top performers, and they should somehow be getting a more advantage market position. And then we have everything in between, you can say. And the general idea is that you tighten the cutoff criteria all the time. So the forefront of this is kind of moving. So products, they should become more and more sustainable over time. And that is why we need the harmonized regulation, because if we don't do it the same way for all products, then somebody will be left behind. And the consumers, they are very, very important in this green transition. So they have to be able to trust the numbers they are being presented for. The Commission is very keen on the red, yellow, green, the traffic lights labeling, and more types of labeling have been out in consumer testing during the pilot testing. So this is to share with you the kind of logic we, at least from the Nordic countries, believe is going to spill over on food as well. If you take the next one. Some of the policy developments which is current in the melting pot. We have the Sustainable Products Initiative, which came out here on the 30th of March, and the negotiations, they will start up shortly. Then we have the Green Claims Initiative. We have been waiting this for a while as well. But it is expected that environmental impacts in the Green Claims Initiative, they have to be documented, and they have to be credible, and they have to be based on life cycle assessments. And this is again to ensure that we have a harmonized approach to things, and to handle the risk of greenwashing. And then we have the issue around the circular economy and the new markets for secondary raw materials and components, where product information will be needed. We have the taxonomy regulation on sustainable finance. It has been handling 2 of the 6 environmental impact or environmental aspects. So climate change and climate mitigation, but the 4 other ones, they are still coming up. And then we have 2 voluntary initiatives from the Commission. The one is the Green Consumption Pledge, and the other one is the Code of Conduct on Responsible Food Business and Marketing Practices. And in the latter, PEF is also playing a role as, you can say, the methodology when assessing these things. If we take the next one. What is interesting around the green claims, of course, is now we've been talking climate change since 2009 or so, but we have 16 impact categories, which also has to be calculated when making a PEF. And what is interesting is how this is going to influence all these numerous eco-labels, both the public and private eco-labels and the food eco-labels. I believe that some scheme owners, they are a little worried about how this is going to influence their schemes. But as this is about also making hotspot analysis on where do you actually have the major environmental impacts, and how do you assess these, I think scheme owners, they should look into the material and see how they actually can use it. My colleagues here in Bureau Veritas, they are doing, for instance, the ASC and the MSc, certification of fish, where biodiversity is a big issue, but of course also how fish farming is influencing the environment due to, for instance, what is it called, uneaten feed and so forth. I think this might be one of the last slides. Yeah, of course, the Nordic collaboration in the agri-food. We have since 2015 been developing discussion papers, notes, and has supported participants in modeling work groups. So we have developed what we call the NEF Agri Group, and that is 4 Nordic universities participating in the Agri Group, and they have been working on the agricultural modeling, looking into biodiversity, manure, and pesticides as one of the activities they have conducted in 2020 and 21. And currently we have started up a project which is led by a Finnish university, but together with universities in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, about possibilities for harmonizing the PEF approach across food categories. Finland, they have been doing a lot of work in green public procurement, and they were working on a harmonizing project, which we thought we were going to enlarge to become a Nordic project. I won't tell you a lot about the, you could say, LCA specialties, but functional units is one very important thing. So do you calculate based on volume, a ton of things, or do you calculate based on a function? For food, the function would be nutrition. And we don't have a unit for nutrition yet. So for food, everything is calculated based on volume. And they are using the existing category rules. They are using different allocation methodologies, which needs to be harmonized. So this project, they are looking into harmonizing it. And I think Ellen and her colleagues, they will be happy for the outcome of this, because they can use it in their continuous work with the sustainable diets. Every year we have a Nordic agri-food workshop, which will disseminate the newest developments, share results and research, and also establishes a forum for discussing PEF. And I think my last slide gives you the information where you can find both presentations and papers and so on.
Thank you very much. I just stopped sharing now. Thank you very much for a very good presentation, very enlightening about, and it linked very nicely back to the first presentation today about LCAs and all this. So now it's to the research director, Helle Meltzer from the Norwegian Institute of Public Health. And Helle, it's been a couple of years since I've seen you last, so thank you so much for joining us, and looking very much forward to your talk. Helle, please take the floor.
Thank you. So thank you for inviting me to this seminar and giving me the opportunity to contribute to your work. I'm a nutritionist working at the Norwegian Institute of Public Health in Oslo. And there I've had the opportunity to work on sustainability issues for quite some years now, including heading the work with a huge application to the Norwegian Research Council last year, and we succeeded in our application. So the last half of my presentation will be about this research project, but I like to start broadly with a larger background. Next slide, please. So you will see some pictures that for some reason I only get up the presentation in a tiny mode. Let's see if I can get it. Here it's better. I like to start broadly, and I'll show you some pictures that you are familiar with already, because a lot of it we've mentioned has already been mentioned in this seminar, including that we've seen this picture of the sustainability goals. And as you know, very many of the goals are related to food and nutrition. My talk will focus on sustainability goal number 12 on responsible consumption and production, but of course it's about food in this case, so I'll also be very involved with SDG number 2 on nutrition, food and hunger and overweight, all that stuff. Next please. So the big broad picture, which we are all familiar with now, we have massive problems and challenges with our ecosystem, with climate, with food waste, and also with public health. And when it comes to public health, I just want to cite the EU here at the bottom, because although you in DTU could show that substantial climate gains would be achieved by changing to a more plant-based diet, it would also be a great improvement if we simply could follow the present dietary guidelines. So many do not follow even our health-based dietary guidelines. So even if we stopped at that, it would be a huge improvement on our ecological footprint. Farm to Fork says it explicitly. It's quoting here: overall diets are not in line with national dietary recommendations, and the food environment does not ensure that the healthy option is always the easiest one. If diets were in line with dietary recommendations, the environmental footprint of food systems would be significantly reduced. So that could be a first step, just to inspire people to follow the health-based dietary guidelines. And then a further step is to implement the environmental part. Next, please. We have also heard the word food system a lot in this seminar. Already Peter Fantke, the first one, mentioned the food system. He had a slightly different picture. This is my favorite one on the food system, because it illustrates how huge and complex it is. It encompasses the environmental aspects, the production aspects, the economic aspects, the social aspects. In the middle of this figure, you can see the consumer. Also, health system is important, and of course the political system. And what this figure explains to us is that there are interactions the whole way through here, and you have a domino effect. If you change one part of the system, it has a large potential to influence all the other parts of the system as well. Next, please. So my task was to talk about the toolbox for change that was in the heading. So what's in our toolbox? We've already heard a lot about this toolbox, not least from the implementation of the dietary, the new dietary guidelines in Denmark. So this will be a sort of summing up of the whole issue. But at the bottom of our toolbox is the basics. That evidence-based dietary and environmental guidelines must form the basis of all actions, and that you have illustrated beautifully through what you are doing in Denmark. Next, please. So I've tried to sort all our tools in this toolbox in 3 main groups. We have political tools, we have tools in our surroundings, and we have tools at an individual level. Next, and here I've just summed up then a lot of the tools that have already been mentioned by several speakers here. We have the market regulation and price policy tools, we have tax and subsidy tools, we have dietary and environmental procurement and serving standards, which can be used for schools and public institutions. And a lot of work is being done there. I mentioned here's the C40 initiative, that's a 40 city initiative, which now probably has a lot more than 40 cities, but that's on track for this tool. We have the possibility to work on labeling standards and regulations, advertising policies, food security standards, area planning. regulating supply chains, and last but not least, information and education, which include food knowledge and skills at all levels in schools. So this is what can be done from a political point of view, and the list is probably even longer, but this is what I came up with at first thought. We can work with our surroundings, the food and drink surroundings, at workplaces and in educational institutions like cantinas, school cantinas. A lot of work, good work has been done there, and more to come. The food and drink offer in local communities, like in sports arrangements, is a possibility. And then, of course, all the nudging we can do in shops and hotels, and where a lot of experiments have been done and quite a lot has been published. The last one is that how we can work on an individual level between friends and colleagues, be good parent examples, and work through our social networks. So this is the toolbox, as you can see, large and diverse, and probably the list could be longer, but this was a quick overview of what I could come up with just now. Next, please. We have also heard a lot about the ambitions of Europe, the European Union, which really has this vision to become a global leader in meeting the SDGs and to become the first climate neutral continent. It's very, very impressive, the ambition level in EU. And this has been exemplified through their farm to fork strategy, approximately 2 years old now, where they come with specific targets to develop an environmental friendly food system. Charlotte too mentioned the PEF work, but a lot more is going on there. Please, the next. So Charlotte showed us the picture on all the eco labels out there. The EU aims to come with a unified nutrition labeling within the end of this year, actually. And that's really needed, because there is a jungle out there also on nutrient labeling. Here is a world map on all the different nutrient labelings that are out there. And you can see there is a lot, but I put a blue ring around the Nutri-Score, developed in France, but already in use in at least 6 different EU countries. And that's leading the race towards where we will end in Europe. So Nutri-Score is the really, really hot topic when it comes to nutrient and nutrition labeling in Europe just now, although I know there's work doing to modify the algorithms. Next. I actually stole this picture from you, Charlotte T, in an earlier presentation I heard you have. And you told us just now there are more than 350 different eco labels out there. Again, the French are heading the race, as far as I know, with this eco score, which you can see in the middle of the picture. This is the one that France suggests to implement in EU, and so time will show if they succeed in getting this one implemented. But we have a little bit more time when it comes to eco scoring and environmental scoring, because the ambition of EU there is to have the framework ready by 2024, and then comes the next implementation, where it has to land on the actual labeling. Next. So what about our project? It's called New Tools. It's a research project, as I already said, funded by the Norwegian Research Council. It started less than half a year ago and will last till the end of November 25. And it includes universities, research institutions, and partners from most of the Norwegian food chain. I headed the work with the application, but the daily work is, the project leader now is Knut Inge Klepp, who many of you might know. Next. So what are we wanting to do? You can just take all the points on this slide. There are 4 of them, I think. One more. So we want to establish indicators as a basis for scoring foods. And we want to work on 2 scoring systems, one for nutritional quality and one for the environmental and social impact. For instance, animal welfare and fair trade aspects. That hasn't been mentioned so far in this seminar. We hope it can be used as a basis for front of pack labeling, but also for product development, food procurement, etc. And parallel work, we hope this work will go parallel to what's going on in EU, and we hope to contribute to the process there. Next. And then, of course, with the Norwegian hat on, we want to ensure that conditions that are important in a Norwegian context are taken into account. Next. So this is just a glimpse. We also foresee some type of traffic light system with going from green to red, one for nutrition, one for environment. And as we've already heard, there are masses of metrics that has to be taken into consideration. Here is just a list of some of them that we will consider, with greenhouse gases and water, land use, nitrogen and phosphorus use as the most common ones, simply because that's where there is most data. Next. And here is our conceptual idea. If you look to the right part of the figure, you will see that we hope to use it for much more than front of pack labeling. We hope it can be used for product development, public food procurement, product reformulation, defining political goals, monitoring and evaluation, etc. Next. I said we had a broad partnership, and that's what's illustrated here. We have some 28 formal partners, and then a lot more that will be stakeholders that we will consult during the process. But almost in the middle here, you will see there are 7 research institutions on board. And then we have our big retailers, we have the NGOs with us, we have 3 directorates, we have the food security directorate, we have the consumer organizations, etc. So you can get a glimpse here of how broad we are trying to work with all the stakeholders. Next. I'm trying to do it fast now because time is running out. But this is second last slide. Here are some of the most important aspects. We want measurable indicators. We think this will create a win-win situation, not demanding too strict requirements for documentation from producers. We hope we get a lot of data, food data from the producers. We will use a mix of quantitative, qualitative, and semi-quantitative indicators. We hope to have a very holistic approach. And then we will focus, as I said, primarily on Norwegian production, but also aim to include other countries. And then weighing implies taking into account many interests, and that's where some of the largest challenges will be. I think I'm at the last one now. Yeah, here is where you can read more about it. We have a homepage. Please contribute with the questions if you have now or later. And the last one. So thank you very much, and thank you for listening, and thank you to the Norwegian Research Council for funding our project.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Helle. That was very interesting and showing a very nice with all your stakeholders and everything in this project and also others. But let's continue with you, Simon Rask. And Pøhl early on today actually announced that you were going to come here and give us some more insight from the Danish authorities side. So you're going to tell us about setting minimum criteria for green public procurement being one of the measures and one of the ways we can go it. Yes, and you're sharing slides and I can see them, not in presentation mode yet, but you'll probably do that.
Okay, setting minimum criteria for green public procurement. I'm very pleased to be here today. And yes, Pøhl Enevoldsen talked just a little bit about what I'm going to talk about here today. I'm going to talk about our proposal to work on a proposal on setting minimum criteria for green public procurement. In Denmark, we already have some criteria on a national level for some municipalities, and we also have some goals at national level. But first, I'll recap on a couple of slides that Anna also showed a little earlier on how we work on healthy and sustainable food intake. So this is the slide that also was presented by Anna, and it shows how we work on changing behavior. We work, of course, we work with communication, we work with knowledge, but it's not enough if we want to change the behavior. So if you show a carrot and a cola, almost everybody knows that the carrots are what we're supposed to, and other vegetables, that's a part of a healthy diet, and Coke and soft drinks are something that you shouldn't have very often. But we still find it difficult actually to live by this knowledge that we have. In Denmark, around 3 out of 4 of the adult populations, they want to live a healthier life than they do today. And when we look at their eating habits, 1 in 3 wants to eat more healthy. So even though we have the knowledge, and even though we have the wishes, we don't always act on it as we want to. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So we don't. Some of them things we can influence, and this is what we are trying to, through our structural changes and our partnerships. And through these engagements, we want to make it easier for the Danish population to make the right choice and make it less effortful to live a healthy life. So Anna also showed this presentation, and I will now go into the minimum criteria for green public procurement. In October 2020, the Danish government launched a strategy for green public procurement. The strategy was the ambition to, it has the ambition to ensure significant reduction in the climate footprint for the procurement in 2013. Among other things, it states that at least 60% of the food served in the state-run canteens has to be organic food. This corresponds with the silver category on the organic cuisine label that we have here in Denmark for professional kitchens. So at state level, we already have a minimum criteria driving the organic procurement. In the strategy, there's also a mention of an initiative on mandatory minimum criteria for sustainable food procurement. And the frame for this project is that it must include relevant experiences from home and abroad, and include experiences with the transformation of the professionals' kitchens that we've had here in Denmark to organic procurement, as well as involve relevant stakeholders in the process. Here in Denmark, if the public procurement is calculated based on invoice data, we see that with data from the state level, municipality level, and regional level, the total public procurement is approximately 25 billion euros, and the food procurement is around 700 million euros a year. Therefore, the recommendation for minimum criteria for sustainable food purchase has the opportunity to have an impact on a large amount of the annual food purchase here in Denmark. And then a bit of the background for the research that we've been doing so far. In Denmark, we have the Danish Council for Climate Change, and they have provided recommendation for climate initiatives in the transition from low carbon society based, and they base it on independent professional analysis. And currently in Denmark, the consumption is an obstacle for having a climate friendly eating habits here in Denmark. The Danes are one of the largest, have one of the largest climate footprints from food consumption per capita here in Denmark, and the average Dane eats more than double the amount of animal-based food compared to the global average. And we also eat more meat and more dairy products than the Europe in average. Today, very few people actually eat climate friendly, and this fact is a barrier for changing eating habits and eating climate friendly diet, because it's not a norm. For example, 4 times a year I meet up with my friends and we make dinner together. And I've tried proposing that we try have eating beans and lentils instead of meat, but they find me real weird when I propose it. So we have to make it more natural and more common to eat climate friendly if we are to succeed. And one way to do this is by changing what we are serving as a public organization. And this is why we have also worked on creating minimum criteria for the public food that are prepared. Yes. So this is a possibility for decision makers in government and regional levels and municipalities to support the normalization process of implementing climate-friendly food by making minimum criteria for the food prepared in the public kitchens. Another report that has been very valuable for us working to create minimum criteria is made by DTU. They have gathered information and provided us with an overview of how professional kitchens here in Denmark are working to provide more sustainable and healthy food at the moment. The report hasn't been published yet, but I think it's coming out next week. Unfortunately, only in Danish. But the report looks at the themes listed here: the organic procurement, on how public kitchens are working with being more climate friendly, how they are focusing on buying local goods, the health focus of preparing the food, and also food waste. All these areas has the potential to be included in setting up minimum criteria for green public procurement. We have turned our proposals for public procurement onto a political process, but so I can't give you all the details at the moment, but I can talk about some of the principles that we have used for creating a proposal for minimum criteria. First of all, we have tried to develop a very simple way of measuring the development towards a healthier and climate-friendly public food procurement. The principle is to measure the share of meat, legumes, and also fruits and vegetables, and measure it as a proportion of the total weight of the food procurement in a professional kitchen, public kitchen. Another principle is that the criteria should be a process. So as you can see here on the screen, we have made steps 3 steps where you have to go from where we are today. Then we have set a goal for 2015 and another more ambitious goal for 2013, where you are to, when you move up the ladder, you have to eat or have a larger share of fruits and vegetables in your kitchen, and also legumes, and a lower level of use of meat. And because the dietary needs change through our lives, we have proposed 1 criteria for people eating after our general recommendations for daycare institutions, schools, and also canteens. And then we have other goals for elderly and people in need for energy-dense foods. So a little bit about the process that we've been going through. The last year, we have been working on a proposal for the minimum criteria. And during this time, we've spoken to a lot of organizations and people with special knowledge in the area. We've spoken to Danish regions, which is a interest organization of the 5 regions here in Denmark. And we've also spoken to local government Denmark, the Association of Interest Organizations for the municipalities here in Denmark. And then we've had a much broader involvement as well with interest organizations, wholesale companies, and also public kitchens and facility management companies as well.
Thank you very much, Simon. That was very nice. And I would like to end up this webinar. Thank you so much for participating, both in a lively discussion and all the very good talks by the speakers today. And I would like to thank the organizing committee here at DTU, the National Food Institute, that have invited the speakers and planned this. So thank you so much. And I hope all of us, all of you, but also me, got a new insight into different aspects of this healthy and sustainable diets. So thank you and take care. Bye-bye.